Have you ever heard the word Fingerspitzengefühl? It's German, in case you had wondered about the length of the word, that's where it's coming from. And it literally translates to fingertip feeling. Having Fingerspitzengefühl describes being able to handle sensitive situations with care, tact, empathy, and consideration for others. And it's a really useful skill in working with humans. English is only my second language. My native language is German, and that English accent you're hearing from me, that's a souvenir of all the people I've ever worked with. And German is the language that I grew up with. And the language that brought to you our famous compound nouns, like Fingerspitzengefühl. We're able to connect nouns to create depth, add meaning, add specificity, or just for fun, and sometimes also for historic reasons. Like with Torschlusspanik. Torschlusspanik is literally gate closure panic, and it's the fear of missing out on big opportunities or life achievements because you're afraid you're running out of time. And anyone who's in their early 30s may have experienced that feeling at some point. This term originated in medieval times when German towns were often encircled by thick walls. Every night, gates of the town would be shut, and so over sunset, people would start hurrying towards the town to not miss out on the closing gates and to avoid having to spend the night in the dark, dangerous wilderness. Hence the term gate closure panic, Torschlusspanik. Little fun fact, this illustration you're seeing here, it's from the year 1640. And the towers and the castle, as well as the walls, are still around today. And this town is actually the town that I grew up in. But in German, we don't just have cool compound nouns, we also have colorful idioms. Like when someone is saying a lot without much substance, you can say, they're talking a meatball onto your ear. Or, jemandem eine Frikadelle ans Ohr labern. You're getting a free German lesson here today. And when you're not understanding anything at all, what you can say in German is, I only understand train station. Ich verstehe nur Bahnhof. Only understanding train station or a meatball on someone's ear are, at least in German, very good signs that communication may have gone wrong. But many other signs of bad communication are a little bit less visible. Stress, unmet expectations, frustration, lack of innovation, decreased productivity, and even increased downtime can be some of them. Bad communication creates a ripple effect that can create mistrust and erode relationships across an entire organization. Sorry, technology. Oh, it's actually working, but not here. Fantastic. But still, despite all these strong effects that bad communication can have, there's a widespread understanding in our industry that developers don't need communication skills. And I think it's an incredibly dangerous misconception. Communication is part of our work every day. It's in what we say or sign, like in meetings at the water cooler or in the hallway. It's in what we write, in code, comments, pull requests, code reviews, or messages. It's in the nonverbal, in our body posture or facial expression, and it's in visual, like in typography or symbols. Engineering requires being able to express complex concepts to different people, and in our teams, we need a shared language to be able to exchange knowledge and learn together. And at its core, engineering is about making decisions and trade-offs. As an industry, we need engineers who communicate, who ask questions before writing the first line of code. And to make the right decisions and trade-offs, you need to have a shared understanding with the people that you're working with. And this is why you cannot be a good engineer without being a good communicator. And being a good communicator will strengthen your team, because communication is about building relationships. And honestly, there's no better way to feel that than when you're standing in a way too small room in Berlin with 15 people. It is very hot and you're waiting for the laptop in the center of the circle that you're standing in to connect with the rest of the team who are in Lagos, Nigeria. And having the call drop once, twice, 3 times, and finally being able to hear your colleagues. That's when you know what relationships are about. Good communication improves everyone's motivation, it increases productivity and improves work results, and it makes strong teams. So what does it mean to communicate well? Over the last 13 years, I've had the honor of working with many extraordinary people and teams in Europe, Asia, Australia, the Americas, and West Africa. The main thing all these teams have taught me over this time is how vital intentionality is in our communication. Good communication doesn't happen organically. We need to be deliberate about it. Good communication gets the point across clearly and coherently. It's effective. It's about understanding and about being understood. This is why we always need to be deliberate about how our communication, and we need to communicate effectively in inclusive ways to ensure understanding. And if there's only one thing you're taking away from this talk, besides the German lessons, make this your guiding principle in your work going forward. Over the next minutes, I want to share with you what I've learned from these teams I've worked with, about how you can communicate more effectively and inclusively in engineering teams. And the first step is in reflecting on how you show up and what you bring when you communicate. Show up with humbleness, with genuine interest and curiosity, and with a desire to build a relationship. Leave your ego at the door. Be open in admitting your limits. It's okay to say, I don't know. This can be really hard, no matter if you're just starting out in your career or if you have a lot of experience already. Because all of us want to be perceived as knowledgeable. And unfortunately, in some teams, being the person who doesn't know something is treated as a sign of weakness. But it is, and it needs to be okay not to know everything. Communication is essential work, but it often falls to members of underrepresented groups in the industry, oftentimes STEM people. But every one of us needs to do this work, especially all of us who have some form of power. Power can come through seniority, special expertise, good connections within your company, or through rank or title. Power gives our words and actions more weight, and all of us who have such power should therefore be extra mindful in how we communicate. We need to use this power to take on some additional communication work for our teams. And if you have such power, being open about your limits and admitting what you don't know can be a really great way to use your power. Emotional awareness is another important aspect that every one of us can work on. And for some of us, it can be a challenge to learn. Many of us grew up with very specific ideas of what it means to be a real man. Often, these are very narrow, repressive ideas, like having to be strong, dominant, and never displaying emotions because they're considered a sign of weakness. These ideas are often summarized under the term toxic masculinity. Many men have been brought up to strive for this ideal of masculinity, and it's still very prevalent in our societies. But this ideal is very harmful to men themselves, because it doesn't allow them to fully express themselves and their emotions. And it's harmful for others as well, because it leaves no room for emotional awareness, for empathy, and for working on to communicate better, because communication is considered a soft skill and unmanly. Men, especially cis-white straight men, are still the majority in the tech industry today. These ideas of what it means to be a real man also blend into interactions at work. The bro culture in many tech companies is the direct result of those ideas, and it's really harmful for teams. Take time to examine your own ideas about yourself and masculinity, and think about which of them might not be helping you or those around you. This can really help you change for the better and build stronger relationships with others, including with the people you work with. Also practice the aforementioned fingertip feeling or Fingerspitzengefühl. Learn to communicate with care, tact, and consideration for others. Be empathetic and read other people's reactions, not just for what they're saying, but also for the emotions behind it, and address them in your responses. When you're in a meeting, make sure that no one is dominating the conversation, especially yourself. Watch out for more quiet folks and pull them into the conversation by addressing them directly. For example, by asking, "What's your opinion? I'd like to hear your thoughts." Without listening, good communication is impossible. And there are a lot of things that you can do to become a better listener. Be open instead of making assumptions. Assumptions mean we're putting our own ideas of someone's thoughts over their actual thoughts and perspectives. Recognize that others bring context, expertise, and perspectives that you don't have. Know that these can make you realize that a situation is more complex than you thought that it would be. Listen to learn and not to respond. Listening with real intent means that I'm going to be open to being very wrong, and I'm comfortable with that in this situation. Remember that conversations aren't competitions, and they're not for you to win. While you're listening, don't already plan your next contribution. Focus on actually listening and be ready to have your mind changed. Use a method called active listening. You can listen first, then use phrases like, "So you're saying that," or "I understand that," and then repeat the gist of what you heard back to the speaker. This works in one-on-one conversations really well and also in group meetings, and is a useful tool to ensure shared understanding. We all want to be heard, seen, and acknowledged, but we also have our limits. In any conversation, work to add your humble part and strive to build on what others say. Ask yourself, what else do we need to achieve our goal? And use this question to contribute to a greater outcome. Be more invested in the result of a conversation than in your own contributions. Listening well is also a great first step to knowing your audience. Get to know the people you're speaking with or interacting with. Learn about their needs and adapt your communication style to them. Some people want a lot of information, detail, context, and technical depth. Others don't. And these needs can also change depending on the subject. Show your audience how the topic you're talking about relates with other topics they know about. And consider how they may react to what you're conveying. Be culturally aware. Be mindful of when you're using references, industry jargon, idioms, expressions, or jokes, because they're often only accessible to a very small group of people. Anything that has layers of meaning is super tricky to navigate and far too easily understood, especially in cross-cultural collaboration. So be very mindful with this. The less you know your audience and the weaker your relationship with them, the more you should be mindful in your communication with them. And the more you should be asking questions and reading their signals so you can adapt. And here's how you can ask better questions. Questions are a great way to open doors, connect with others, and build relationships. First of all, try to use neutral questions. Questions like, "So how did you like my great pull request with all these awesome changes I implemented?" are not very helpful. It's a leading question, and leading questions already often carry a glowing opinion, like in this case. And in this case, it also means they increase the barrier for the other person to share a different opinion. Leave your biases and opinions out of questions you ask as much as you can, and ask them in a neutral way, like, "How did you like my pull request?" Use open questions. They can help you uncover information and learn something new. Start questions with who, what, where, when, why, or how. So the 5 W's and the how. Like, for example, with "How did you like my pull request?" Or "What did you think about my pull request?" You can learn more by using follow-up questions. They signal that you're listening, that you care and want to know more. Ask, "What makes you say that?" Or "Why do you take this approach?" to dig deeper. I also really love questions that help us learn. What should we do differently next time? Or what can we learn from this that might be useful to us in the future? These are really great questions to help us continuously improve. And give the other person space to answer. Silent isn't always a void that needs to be filled. Give people space to think and respond, and in the meantime, enjoy the silence. When communication goes wrong, it often has to do with expectations that weren't met. Like when a project turns out to be a failure, or a piece of work doesn't get ready on time, and there's no way to change course anymore. This is why timing and clear expectations are really important. Clarify what you expect from each other as teammates, and define guidelines for how you want to communicate. The tools that you want to use, and in which ways you want to use them. Such guidelines can really help everyone understand what others expect of them and help you communicate more effectively as a team. Avoid surprises. Don't wait until code review to share your direction. Communicate early and continuously to ensure shared understanding with your teammates at all times. And bad news should travel faster than good news. That's what Bill Gates once wrote. Share bad news early. It allows people to react and take actions. It can be really tough to be the bearer of bad news. Unfortunately, as I've learned from experience, when kept in silence, bad news has a habit of growing much worse and much bigger over time, and that usually really fast. Deliver bad news as soon as you can and hear them. The worst bad news is late bad news. Have you ever had a discussion about whether or not a feature should be built? Or anyone ever had a heated argument about which tool to use? Or gotten into an argument about implementation details? This kind of situation can easily happen, and it happens pretty often. And often it's also a warning sign that we're discussing the wrong topics. In these situations, I like using a couple questions to regain focus. One of my favorite questions of all times is, what problem are we trying to solve? When you see a discussion go down a rabbit hole, you can throw this question as a rope to drag it back to the light of day. It helps us connect with our main goal, solving problems for our users, our company, and our teams. The second question I like asking is, what is our priority? When you're facing a lot of different tasks, it's easy to get lost in details and lose sight of the most important ones. This question connects us to what we actually want to accomplish. And in discussions about communication or collaboration, I like asking, what culture are we looking to build? This question is really useful because culture often appears as something really abstract that's really hard to grasp. But culture is the behaviors that we reward and punish. And this question can help us remember that culture is in all the actions that we're taking every single day. These three questions are relatively simple and yet straightforward, which makes them really useful for turning conversations back to what really matters. Another way of how you can become a more effective communicator is by reading better. More and more of our communication and conversations also in engineering teams rely on writing. So here's how you can become a better writer. Again, know your audience. Knowing your audience is especially important in writing because even in chat, the communication pace is decreased. And you often don't get immediate reactions, which you could directly respond to. In addition, in written communication, important communication layers like body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, pace of speech are stripped away. Thus, if you can anticipate concerns or questions that your audience may have, address them upfront in your writing. Use direct, simple language and short words wherever possible. Don't use long or overcomplicated words to impress people. Wanting to be understood should always trump your desire to sound clever. And say more with fewer words, and cut out all words or sentences that don't add to your message. Write short sentences. They're easier to understand and more accessible for multicultural audiences. Keep your sentences to around 15 to 20 words. This is around one line in many document editors and many chat tools. Be mindful of the voice you're using. You can use active or passive voice, and a great way to spot passive voice was shared by Monzo recently. You can detect passive voice when you can add "by monkeys" to a sentence and it still makes sense. The incident was investigated by monkeys. The bug will be fixed by monkeys. Passive voice is often used in incident reports. It creates emotional distance, it disconnects us from context and causes, and it removes clarity. Active voice, on the other hand, is more engaging, it's more personal and clearer. It adds a layer of responsibility because it makes ownership clear, and it can help you build trust. So use active voice wherever you can. Write, "We investigated the incident," or "I will fix the bug." With any message you send, ensure to convey your main message. Ask yourself, what do I want the other person to do with this information? and include a clear call to action, a request, or a question to tell them what you expect or need of them. Be direct with kindness. Written communication can sometimes feel like walking on thin ice, especially when it's asynchronous. We want to be nice, or we come from a culture where directness is considered impolite, or we just don't want to be rude to our teammates. So we often shy away from being direct. We soften our messages and use subtlety and nuance instead, and hope that the other person will interpret things in the way that we imagined. All of that often leads to misunderstandings. This is why I'd like to encourage you to be more direct. Combine your directness with kindness and genuine desire to help your audience understand or grow. Practically, this means be thoughtful, don't just blurt things out. Use I statements like, I think, I would like to, or I want to ask you to. Use a neutral tone and be succinct. Separate facts from your own feelings and observations. Make straightforward, clear, and specific requests about what you want. Being direct with your teammates can increase trust in the relationships between you and them and ensures shared understanding. Use emoji. They can be really useful to get feelings across. Emotions are an important part of communication and of building relationships, but contexts like body language and facial expressions which convey them are missing from our written language, and emoji can bring some of that context back. Emoji are also a relatively new way of communicating, and they aren't universal. We all bring our own life experiences and cultural contexts into how we translate them. This is why the one and only golden rule of emoji use is, again, know your audience. The less you know them and the weaker your relationship with them, the more you should be mindful when you use emoji. I probably know 3 people in this room, so this slide here feels like a dangerous move. Like in engineering, rewrites can be a really useful learning experience. Edit everything you write. Simplify your language, remove unnecessary words, clarify your main message, and fix typos. If a document is important, have someone else review it. And editing can really help you learn to write better over time. And last but not least, know when to not write. Even if time zones make it hard, if you haven't been able to clarify something after going back and forth twice, it's time to talk. If something is upsetting you, it's time to talk. Writing better also means that you can collaborate more asynchronously, which puts you and your team into a position where you can make better use of synchronous time. One of the teams I'm currently working with is distributed across 3 continents and 16 time zones, all the way from Japan to the west coast of the United States. They have a spreadsheet in which everyone lists their regular work hours, and for a while this spreadsheet contained exactly 1 column with 1 person who was always available, Batman. But even Batman had a daily lunch break. This team at the moment doesn't have any time when all of them are working and could actually meet. In a team like this one, it's clear that synchronous time is the most precious good that we have. But in teams in the same location or in nearby time zones, we often underestimate the cost of synchronicity. It interrupts, increases context switching, and it removes focus, all of which has impact on productivity and can also impact morale. No matter if your closest teammate is on the same floor, in the same time zone, or not even on the same continent, learn to write better, so you can have more effective written and asynchronous communication. Reserve synchronous time for creating a shared understanding, reflecting together on how you work, and use it to discuss context and strategy, and to strengthen relationships. And, as my last point today, say thank you more often. Genuine gratitude helps strengthen relationships. When you appreciate someone's work or actions, tell them. Be genuine and be generous with your gratitude. In preparation for this talk, many people on Twitter shared their learnings about communication with me, and I would like to thank them here. But most of all, I'd like to thank all the teams who I've worked with so far, because they've taught me so much about communicating and how to grow as teams. So now, what about you and your team? I would like to encourage you to work on how you communicate. Don't talk meatballs onto other people's ears. Instead, learn to listen well. Know your audience. Ask good questions. Communicate early and often and about what really matters. Write better and use synchronous time well. And say thank you more often. Communicate effectively in inclusive ways to ensure understanding. To make sure that your teammates don't only understand train station. To improve your relationships with them and to become a stronger team. Thank you.